So magic beans. This is how Peter Mayer, our UU musician who wrote Blue Boat Home, tells the story. He said, imagine with me, if you will, that you're Jack in that story of Jack and the Beanstalk. But there's been a change in the storyline. Imagine instead of Mom throwing those beans out the window, she just handed them back to you, Jack, and said, do what you want with them. And for some reason, known only to you, you didn't plant those magic beans. You think it over, you decide, not today, and before you know it, he says, you're middle-aged. And he imagines, you still have those magic beans. They're in your nightstand. And you open the drawer sometimes and glance and see the beans, and you ask yourself, are you ever going to plant your magic beans? And he sings, that's not how the story goes. When do heroes play it safe? You've got a job and a family, but not a single golden egg. I met my first real life, honest to God, holy fool when I was in seminary a few years after my mom met her. Maybe I met her when I was a teenager through my mom. Her name's Kay Jorgensen, and this is the story she tells of starting the Faithful Fools Street Ministry in San Francisco. She passed away a few years ago, but she would always tell this story as the origin story of her ministry, of this street ministry. She said it was a sunny day in Berkeley, which is always a good way to start a story, in my native Berkeley opinion. And Kay was in seminary, and this particular day she was walking down Shattuck Avenue to get herself some lunch when suddenly something hit her upper arm, and she stopped and turned and saw a man standing at the bottom of the BART station steps, and he was waving and pointing up and yelling at her, they're down there. And so she looked down, and indeed, there were 2 pennies lying on the ground. She reached down to pick them up and thought, well, that's strange. But she put them in her pocket and went along her way. And then when she got to the blue and gold grocery, she picked out a sandwich and went to the refrigerator section of the store to get something to drink. And just then, as she was reaching in to find her beverage for lunch, a man said, excuse me, you wouldn't happen to have 2 pennies, would you? And he gestured to the drink he was holding in his hand. If I just had 2 more cents, he said, I could get myself this drink. And Kay realized, of course, she did have 2 pennies. So she pulled those 2 pennies right out of her pocket and handed them to the man, and he bought his drink and left. And every time I heard her tell that story, she would end it by saying, and that's the moment I knew. I knew this ministry would succeed. Magic pennies, magic beans. You have to risk looking like a fool if you're going to plant something that matters. No transformation comes without this risk. And anyone who's ever been part of the Faithful Fools Street Ministry knows to keep picking up those magic pennies. When I used to make fun of my mom for it. Now I do it too. Anytime you see a penny on the ground, you look like a fool caring about these single copper cents. The paradox, I think, of all of these seeds, of these pennies, these magic beans, these seeds we've been talking about in Jesus' parables this last month, the paradox is that the seeds of transformation and the seeds of stuckness, of leaving magic beans in the nightstand, they arrive in the same moment. The seeds of transformation, the seeds of stuckness, they're the same seeds. The magic beans, they come with all their potential for mythic adventures in the sky, but if you remember the story, they also come with the humiliation of having sold a cow for beans. I think about that relationship between shame and pride. One of the psychologists I've read recently talks about the relationship being that I've mentioned this to you before, that shame, we make shame-based identifications growing up. We identify with the shame that we feel, because a kid doesn't know if they feel bad that it's about something out there, not about themselves, right? So we make these shame-based identifications, and then we have to make a pride-based counter-identification to balance it out. We have to create some pride to hold on to take care of that shame. This is this relationship between shame and pride, and I've come to think about it as the wounding. Within the wounding is the wanting. Within the wounding is the wanting for our own and for the world's healing. If we ignore the wound, stick it in the nightstand, try not to feel it, numb it away, we get stuck. And we'll never find that golden goose. But if we listen to the wound, if we let it lead us to our own wanting, we discover that it contains within it the desire we need to find our own healing. Within the wound is the wanting wisdom of what we need. Jack, oh Jack, what scared you so, he sings. Made you hide those beans and run. Did you hear the rumors, of the fee-fi, fo and fum? I don't know about you, but I've fled from some giants in my life. Growing up, I remember giving up anything pretty quickly that I wasn't good at naturally. I had a lot of natural talents, and so when I realized I'd have to put effort in to grow, I just give that up. I wonder if the first one might have been ballet. There was a video of me I'm going to preach more about this gender in a month or so, but start telling you a little story. So it was a video of me, probably 4 or 5 years old, wearing a pink tutu and dancing. I'd taken one ballet class, and I was dancing. I, by the way, was the only boy in that ballet class, I'm pretty sure, but definitely the only big and chubby boy in that ballet class. But I wanted a pink skirt, and I wanted lightness and grace. And I'm not sure how old I was when I watched that video and had the sharp pang of shame let me know that that was not okay, not safe. But I do know that I was 18, 19, 20 years old when I turned back and said I could be a dancer after all. It was a moment of playing and interplay, this improvisational movement and storytelling and singing that has been a core of my spiritual practice since then. And I came in, I've told you this story, I was on my bike and my pant leg was rolled up because, to keep the grease from getting on my jeans, and so I was starting to move around a little with my pant leg still rolled up, and the teacher, Elizabeth, she said, "Oh, Marcus, you look just like a modern dancer. It's very much, in vogue, this look." And I said, "Oh, you're saying I'm a dancer?" I said in my kind of self-deprecating irony, and she looked at me with absolute compassion and joy and said, "Marcus, you are definitely a dancer." So today is Palm Sunday in the Christian liturgical calendar. The story that had me confused about, the Sermon on the Mount. It's because of Palm Sunday that I thought that the Sermon on the Mount was the sermon where he was riding on a mount. And I still like that idea. Someday I'm going to give a sermon on a mount. Because it's a great image, him coming into town on the donkey. Right? This triumphant fool. John Dominic Crossan, who we were talking about last week, and Marcus Borg, another biblical scholar, they framed this moment for us really well. They said that you have to realize this was not just Jesus off on his own doing this. This was a stunt of political theater, because what was happening on the other side of town, literally at the same moment, coming in from both sides of the town, was the annual imperial march into Jerusalem at Passover to demonstrate the imperial power of the Roman Empire to the Jews while they celebrated their freedom. They say a visual panoply of imperial power, cavalry on horses, foot soldiers, leather armor, helmets, weapons, banners, golden eagles mounted on poles, sun glinting on metal and gold, sounds, the marching of feet, the creaking of leather, the crinkling of brides, the beating of drums, the swirling of dust, the eyes of the silent onlookers, some curious, some awed, some resentful. This a moment you can imagine this political theater of the Roman Empire, and here comes Jesus on the other side of town in rags on a donkey, proclaiming that he was the king. Friday was the day of transgender visibility. And amidst a national conversation that dehumanizes trans people to make them a political fulcrum, to use them as a prop in the culture war, people of all gender stripes took to the internet, took to the streets to proclaim their visibility and their identities. In the face of the states across the country restricting access to medical care for trans youth, the Trans Legislation Tracker says 492 bills in 47 state legislatures. 44 have failed, but 26 are already on the books. And there are stories of suffering, of violence, of oppression, but in this day of visibility, it was more than that. This musician, Ezra Furman, put it like this trans day of visibility is a trans day of uncontrollable laughter. It's a trans day of structures of love, solid as rock. A trans day of looking after one another even when nothing's wrong at all. Trans day of dancing until your sweat surely contains detectable traces of the music playing. Trans day of direct access to divinity. Trans day of angelic clarity of mission. Trans day of the unkillable smile. Trans day of the wilderness doesn't care what anyone calls it. Trans day of good food we made together. Trans day of playing with animals. Trans day of everyday life as prayer in itself. Trans day of spinning in circles, whirling and whirling out beyond any boundaries they drew for us. And the image that got me going was a trans legal superstar out there, someone I know who happens to be the spouse of Reverend Dr. Sophia Bettencourt, our likely next president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Sam Ames. He posted a picture of himself that, well, it kind of blew up the internet, at least the UU minister internet a bit. He's got this, sultry look on his face, really hot photo, and he's unbuttoning this white color shirt, and underneath is a Superman logo. So the last of the seed parables that we've been talking about. The kingdom of God is as if someone would scatter seed on the ground and would sleep and rise night and day, and the seed would sprout and grow, and he does not know how. The earth produces of itself the first stalk, then the head, then the full grain in the head. But when the grain is ripe, at once he goes in with his sickle because the harvest has come. Whatever it is that you might need to be more visible about, whatever it is that your magic beans need to be planted in, plant them and let time and spirit do their work. You don't have to know how it's going to turn out. You don't have to be ready when you plant the beans to take on the giant. All you have to do for that first moment is reach down and pick up the penny. Risk looking like a fool. You just have to plant the seeds, and this really is the hard part, trust the world to do its part. What magic beans do you have sitting in your nightstand? Is there something you want to make visible finally to the world? Is there something the world is asking of you that turns out to be already in your pocket? If you'd told me 3 years ago, as my marriage was ending in turmoil and hardship, that I would now be awaiting for hundreds of bulbs planted in every inch of our garden to become the flowers for my wedding in just a couple weeks, I never would have believed that. Maybe it's a conversation with a friend or a relative you haven't spoken to in years. Maybe it's a story you've always wanted to share but have never found the time to sit down and write. Maybe it's a confession that you really do love that outrageous whatever it is. Maybe it's a regret that you'd like to do something about. Take the first step, the one close in. Plant your magic beans and let the story carry you on. Jack, he sings, it's not too late, to sow those seeds of fate. So throw them out your window, go to sleep, and when you wake, things will happen, things you never dared to dream, but they won't happen unless you plant them magic beans. May it be so. And amen.